What's going on, everybody? My name is Jake, also known as the Haunted Beard. Thank you for joining me. So, I have been making my way through George A. Romero's zombie films, and I have reached the end of this series of reviews, as today I'm going to be talking about Survival of the Dead.
Last time anyone counted, 53 million people were dying every year, 150,000 every day, 107 every minute. It had become an us versus them world.
In Survival of the Dead, we find ourselves on Plum Island off the coast of Delaware, and local residents simultaneously fight a zombie epidemic while hoping for a cure to return their undead relatives back to their human state. This came out in 2009, and this was the final feature film that Romero directed before he passed away. And doing a little bit of research, I found out that Romero actually planned on making 2 more zombie films continuing this storyline. The next one was going to be called Road of the Dead, but unfortunately they never got made. And what Romero does here with Survival is this is basically a sequel to the previous film, Diary of the Dead. And if you watch that review, one of the issues that I had with that movie was just in the overall story direction. I like where Romero was taking things and how he ended them with Land of the Dead. And so the structure here is a little bit weird because you've got Land of the Dead, which really kind of continues on Day of the Dead back from the 80s. And then Romero just kind of shifts gears with these final 2 movies and kind of goes back to the beginning into sort of prequel status and starts kind of developing a whole new story. And I wish he would have just continued that storyline with Land of the Dead. I really liked what he was doing there with the zombies and how they were kind of evolving and becoming more self-aware, whereas here, again, he just goes all the way back to the beginning. And unfortunately, because I wasn't that big of a fan of Diary of the Dead in the story direction, being that this just continues the same story, I wasn't really all that invested overall with this film as well. The best thing about this for me was I appreciated that Romero gave this a bit of a Western vibe to it, which I thought was kind of cool and kind of interesting. Unfortunately, the film that kind of surrounds that sort of zombie Western horror movie it's average at best, in my opinion. And most of this film didn't really land for me. I liked that idea of the Western. I liked kind of the central story that you're kind of pitting these 2 major families against one another that live on this island. You've got the O'Flynns and the Muldoons, and I like Westerns in general, and so I was invested enough to want to see like where the film was ultimately going to go. I was kind of hoping and anticipating a little bit for this big kind of climactic showdown between these 2 families and really the 2 main characters. So the film had my interest in that aspect, but the build up to the kind of climactic showdown isn't really anything all that special. And then if I'm being totally honest, the climax of this movie is not really all that great either, unfortunately. And this is one of those movies that I feel like there isn't a whole lot to say about it. It's just kind of fine overall. It's pretty middle of the road. There's nothing here about the characters that's really all that memorable. Romero kind of leans a little bit more into the humor in this film than he's done really in any of the other films that have come before it. And that humorous tone, it's really silly and goofy. There's one kill where a guy sticks a fire extinguisher into a zombie's mouth and, and shoots it, and then like his eyeballs pop out. There's another one where a guy takes like a flare gun and shoots it at a zombie and lights him on fire, and then he puts a cigarette into the burning zombie to light a cigarette. I would say this even leans more into intended comedy than like outright horror. It's not really trying to scare you, and so it's not scary. It's not even really trying to be all that tension-filled or suspenseful, and so you don't really get any of those sort of vibes to it. It's just a lot of it is pretty silly and goofy, and for me personally, this is just not my style of horror comedy really whatsoever. I was just not really a fan of the overall tone, at least for the most part, and so yeah, I just didn't jive with it all that well. There's a handful of scenes in this movie, too, that just feel kind of odd and awkward, and I don't know if they were intended to, if that's sort of a humorous tone that Romero was going for, but they just kind of felt clunky and awkward and I just didn't like it. I don't really know what else to say, and maybe it had to do with kind of how they were shot and edited, but there's just kind of a clunky, odd feeling to some of the scenes in this movie as well. I also felt that some of the themes that Romero was kind of dealing with here largely went unexplored and kind of underdeveloped. There's kind of this whole tension between the two main families where one of them just wants to go around and kill all the zombies and get rid of them, and the other one, he proclaims to be this man of faith, and he doesn't want to just go around and kill them, and having hopes that maybe they can get them back and you know, have them return to their normal kind of human state sort of thing. And so there's a little bit of this kind of, you know, ethical conundrum that gets brought up here, but like I said, it kind of feels largely underdeveloped and unexplored. And ultimately, it all builds up to the climax, which I was, again, kind of anticipating and hoping we could get some cool sort of Western zombie showdown climactic moment. And we get that a little bit, but again, it kind of just falls flat. This is a movie that it just feels a little tired overall. It feels kind of like a been there, done that sort of thing. There's nothing here that's super memorable. This is a film that, you know, if you were to ask me to recall any sort of specific details about it, you know, a couple weeks from now, I'm probably going to largely forget most of this movie in, you know, a very short amount of time. And so again, it just kind of feels tired. It kind of feels a little uninspired. There's just not much here that really stands out or is going to stick with you, at least for me anyways. And then my final kind of issue with the movie has to do with really the final note that it ends on. And you have this moment where they have these zombies inside this fence, and they've put a horse in there, and they're sitting there waiting and hoping that the zombie will start eating the horse, that they're hoping that it'll kind of redirect its hunger and desires away from people and will eat something else. Well, that ends up happening, only the person who witnesses it ends up getting killed before she can tell anybody what she saw. And I didn't really understand why that happened. There's not really any sort of explanation given. It just sort of happens. And I guess like maybe the zombies got hungry enough to where they finally just decided to eat something that was near them that they could have access to. And I don't know how much of a fair criticism that is, because again, Romero was planning on making more of these, which I would imagine he was probably going to get into and deal with a little bit in the follow-up films, which again, unfortunately, we never got. But yeah, that's kind of left largely unexplored and unexplained. So unfortunately, this series of movies ends on a bit of a disappointment, as I wasn't too much of a fan of these last two entries, and I wish Romero would have just continued that storyline that he was going with the previous ones. But anyways, yeah, those are my thoughts on Survival of the Dead. There's not really much more to say here. Like I said, it's largely just kind of an unmemorable sort of movie that I don't have a whole lot more to add or say about it. So it's not like egregiously awful. It's probably just sort of like a 5 out of 10 type of movie. Maybe even a 4. It's a 4 or 5 somewhere in there. Yeah, that's really all there is to say about it. So those are my thoughts. Like always, hit me up down below. Let me know your guys' thoughts on these. What I'm going to do here to officially kind of cap off this entire series of reviews is I'm going to do a ranking video. And so I covered 8 movies in the series, so I'll do a ranking video ranking all 8 of those. And yeah, that'll be up next. So that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching. If you got anything out of this video, go ahead and do me a favor and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.